Back in August, I took delivery of the first new car I had ever purchased, and I'm happy to say that it's been an incredibly pleasant experience. The Model 3 rear-wheel drive, which I know everyone has different needs and different preferences when it comes to what car fits them best, but I'm just biased enough to say that I think this is the best Tesla you can buy once you factor in the actual cost of the vehicle. It's easy to just say, oh yeah, the Plaid Model X or the quad-motor 500-mile range Cybertruck, that's the best buy because it's going to have all the bells and whistles, but you're going to end up paying for them. This is the only Model 3 that you can buy new for sub $60,000, and it just checks so many boxes for me. I have lots of good things to say about it, so if you're hoping for a rant or a tangent on how terrible Tesla is, then might as well just stop watching the video now. This is not going to be fun for you, but I do still have some things I don't like and things I wish they would fix or address. But let's start off with what I love about the car coming from the outside in. So this is actually one of the things I'm most impressed with the car, is just the overall proportions. Not only is it very beautiful, in my opinion, I mean, yes, they're becoming very commonplace and they're starting to become as regular as seeing, you know, a Honda Civic or a Prius if you live in California, but I still think it doesn't carry that same stigma of, I don't know, nerdy dorkiness that the Prius did. Some people may view it that way, but I do find it overall just a very classic design, fairly timeless, and I love the chrome delete they chose with the matte black trim. But what impresses me the most when driving it into, you know, tight parking spaces or busy parking lots or, you know, superchargers is just like how easily it fits in so many different circumstances. This is objectively a smaller vehicle than my last car, a Hyundai Sonata, but yet it doesn't feel like we're missing out on anything. The trunk space is still huge, plus it has the sub trunk for more access to storage that you want to keep even more hidden beneath the trunk. And we even use the frunk more regularly than we do the trunk because a lot of the time we're not moving all that much stuff, and the frunk is more towards, of course, the front of the vehicle, so it's just easier to access. So large amounts of storage space, so much to the point that we have like barely ever even come close to topping out on the storage. We were just the other day picking up a bunch of groceries and Christmas gifts, and we fit everything in the trunk perfectly, and we still had room in the frunk and sub trunk if we wanted to pick up more stuff, but we'd already hit up like 3 different locations, and basically after 4 months of ownership, it has convinced me that we are not the type of people that need a Model Y. You know, the extra cargo space is always nice and appreciated, but if we would have spent all that extra money on the Model Y, I can tell you confidently right now, it basically would have gone to waste, at least in terms of cargo space. I still think the Model Y is an overall better vehicle in terms of practicality. I definitely would prefer having the higher ride height. That does get kind of old, having to like fall into the car, and the Model 3 does sit pretty low to the ground, but out of all sedans and hatchbacks I've ever owned and driven in, I am still routinely impressed with how much space such a little car can have. I always pull into this tight parking space and I'm worried that I'm going to be too close to the people next to me or I'm going to hit something in front of me, but no, I always get out of the car and I'm like, oh, I actually had tons of room to spare. It can even just barely fit in a lot of compact parking spaces and not stick out too much. So love the overall dimensions of this vehicle. I love how much cargo room they've packed into a very beautiful and aerodynamic design. So huge shout out to Franz von Holsten for checking all of the boxes with an aerodynamic, relatively affordable and still practical sedan design. To me, this is like as peak as a sedan could get. Maybe it could be a little bit better if they had a hatch design and made it easier for loading stuff in, because, you know, a trunk only gets so wide. But hey, this Model 3 is like 1/3 the price of a Lucid Air, and it still has a wider trunk opening than the Grand Touring does. So I love bragging about that to all of my Lucid friends. But then coming inside the vehicle, this is the main reason I really love Teslas. Like, yes, the exterior is beautiful and I love it, but ultimately that's not the reason I buy the car. I don't really care about what it appears to look like to others. Some people won't buy a car simply because of the brand association. I'm not that type of guy. I'm just like, if the product is good, you know, it's a safe, reliable, energy efficient vehicle, that's what I want. But in terms of overall personal preference, the interior is what really shines to me. The main thing that I keep coming back to whenever I think about like buying from a different EV company or a different brand, I always come back to the Tesla software and the display. It's not for everybody. I know that, you know, it's all personal preference and what people want interior wise. Like, I know a lot of people that need to have buttons and dials, and I'm like the exact opposite. I love getting rid of things. I love simplistic and minimal interiors, and the Model 3 just overly leans into that, even with the steering wheel. That's honestly one of my favorite things that I notice anytime I I get into another vehicle is that most car companies love to have, you know, like 500 different buttons on the steering wheel and 800 different buttons on the center console and the dash and everything. It's also a huge pet peeve of mine to have any kind of driver controls down beneath the armrest. Like, to me, this whole center column, that's just for storage. That's really all that should be used for. And yes, the Model 3 has a ton of space in the armrest. The wireless chargers are so elegantly put and keeps my phone charged all the time, which I really appreciate. I don't think there should be a gear selector or, you know, a one pedal driving button or anything down there. All of the controls should just be up here closer to the road, and the display ultimately has to be my favorite part of the Model 3 interior. No other EV in this price point is going to have a display this good. I've looked, I've checked. The only way you can get a display even close to this big or as good is if you go with something like a Rivian or a Model S. Hopefully the Aptera launches and then we'll have something comparable, but every Model 3 price point alternative or cheaper model is going to have, you know, a big portrait mode display with a Creta UI, or it's going to have buttons and dials everywhere where they don't need to be. Oh my god, start buttons drive me nuts, and I love that this car just doesn't have that dated mindset when it comes to car interiors. It just figures out what the essentials are and what's practical, and I find the scroll wheels on the Model 3 steering wheel incredibly intuitive and also very beautiful in terms of their design. Like, not everything's about aesthetics, but I find it amazing how clean the design is, and yet you can scroll up and down to change your speed when on autopilot or your volume, and you can click side to side to skip tracks or adjust your following distance, and you can press inward on one to activate voice commands. You can hold down both to hard reset the software if the computer ever crashes. Never happened to me, by the way, but I like knowing that I can do that if necessary. And this display being so big improves your visibility capabilities, right? Like, you turn on your blinker, you have this very easy to view blind spot camera, which I don't see as good on other vehicles. And when you're backing up, you get this huge view of the rear camera, which makes it very easy when backing into the garage or backing into a supercharging stall. And you're just not gonna get that on other EVs. Even, sorry, I keep picking on them, but Lucid isn't gonna have a backup camera as large and as easy to see as the Teslas. Now, some people still want the bird's eye view. I haven't really found myself wanting it. I guess I never had it in a previous vehicle, so that may be why I don't prioritize it, but I just find the repeater cameras and the rear camera so easy to see with such a large display. Plus, I have park assist on my vehicle because it's got the ultrasonic sensor still, so sorry to new Tesla owners that didn't get that, but I just love this display in all of its capabilities. I use Tesla theater mode all the time. I love being able to monitor my energy consumption on the go, and it's very easy to customize the settings and go through customization within the software, and you just don't see an OS that's so intuitive and so modern looking to where it just feels like an extension of your phone or laptop, but it's just baked into the car. And this is the first party display. It's not an aftermarket thing, and the mobile app is so capable in how easily it works with controlling the car. Oh my god, I preheat the car, and back in the summertime, pre-cooled the car like literally every day. I'm using the heated seats right now. It feels great. They heat up pretty quickly to me, and every morning before we get in the car, it's so easy to just heat it up before you get inside of it. And because the app is so responsive and so intuitive, it just doesn't make me feel like I'm missing out on a key fob or anything. I really just kind of forgot that key fobs were a thing, and I think that's what's most impressive about this vehicle as a whole, is how quickly you get like completely comfortable with the idea, and it's very easy to take all of these features for granted. Like, occasionally I'll have to like drive my old Sonata, which luckily we don't have to do too regularly, but whenever a family member needs it, or, you know, when this Model 3 was in service, which I'll get into, I had to get in my old car, and I immediately realized how complicated it all felt. And even though it was a car that I had been driving for like 6 years, it felt totally foreign and so unintuitive and so bizarre that, oh yeah, I gotta put the key in the ignition, I gotta turn it, it makes all this noise. And I never realized how comfortable the seats are in the Model 3 until I sat in my old car. You know, once you start driving it every day and you get accustomed to all of these pleasures and all of these comfortable quality of life features, you don't think about them. And that's something that I keep trying to remind myself. Part of the reason I wanted to do this review was to remind myself of all of the great things I love, because it's very easy to just start using it because you skip all of these processes, right? There's no start button, there's no keys, there's no ignition. You just walk up to the car and it unlocks. You walk away from the car and it locks. Once you go back, you realize how many things you're not even thinking about anymore. And I guess that's why I ultimately love my Model 3 so much, is it just eliminates so many processes. I don't have to run errands and go to the gas station. I just plug in when I'm at home, which I'm gonna take the car home anyway. The app already tells me how much I've spent spent on electricity and how much I've saved on gas, which, by the way, within the first 3 months of ownership, the Tesla app claimed I saved over $500 on gas alone. Now, I do think the Tesla app is a little bit generous. It tends to round up on what it thinks gas costs, so it's probably not quite actually $500 because I wasn't paying what the Tesla app thinks I was paying for gas, but accounting for their rounding errors, it's probably closer to like $400 over the course of a couple months, which is a big win for me, especially considering the insurance of this car is only about twice the price of the insurance on my old car, which was about $40 a month through Tesla insurance. I appreciate the transparency, the fact that I don't have to pay for 6 months up front. They let you customize it, exactly what you're covered for, what your deductibles are, and that let me basically lower my rate to be around $80 a month. So an extra $40 a month for insurance, but saving well over $100 a month on gas is a huge win. And I just don't like adding trips. I don't like adding errands to gas stations. I can't get gas from home. I can get electricity from home. And I live in a place where electricity is honestly pretty expensive. I'm on the time of use plan with my electricity provider, and still, even for off-peak charging, it's 25 cents a kilowatt hour, which is pretty high compared to the national average, but still, even with that, it beats paying for gas. It's definitely cheaper, and I love how little energy this vehicle uses. I also don't feel like I don't really need that much more range. I mean, obviously, more range would be appreciated if I could have it. It's just at the time of ordering, you know, the long-range Model 3 was like over $10,000 more than this vehicle. So sure, it would save me some time on road trips. I've definitely never had straight up range anxiety though. There's so many superchargers everywhere. The car is overly generous with making sure that you arrive at every supercharger with plenty of buffer. So never once have I felt like, oh no, I'm gonna run out of charge, I'm gonna be stranded. But there have been times where I'm like, okay, the car can't make it to this on a single stop, so it has to route to a supercharger. Then I'll have to stop and charge there for a while. And sometimes, you know, even though the superchargers are pretty close to the highway, they still have to take you off a certain exit, and then you're waiting at a stoplight and you're waiting for it to turn left, and you can see the supercharger, but you just have to keep waiting and waiting because it's busy and the light won't change. So it adds trip time to have the standard range, but I would rather the trip time take a little bit longer than pay the extra $10,000 to $11,000. That's a little bit high for me. The Aptera is more reasonable in their increase of price for higher range numbers because you can spend like $5,000 more and get an extra 200 miles of range, whereas with the Model 3, it's like you can spend an extra $11,000 and get like 60 miles of range extra, which is not that big a deal. Plus, this is also a Model 3 with lithium iron phosphate batteries in it, which means you're actually encouraged to charge it to 100% regularly. The cycle life is higher, so it won't degrade as quickly. So even though the Model 3 long range is currently able to hit like 350 miles on a charge, you're not supposed to get it to 100% that frequently, and it will degrade faster than the LFP will, so you're not going to retain that 350 miles for very long. In terms of degradation with this vehicle, it's still a bit too early for anything to be very concrete, but for the record, the EPA rates it at 272 miles of range. When I first got it, the app actually said 273. The range number from the battery in the app and in the car is not that accurate. It changes depending on the time of day. Now, when I charge the car to 100%, it'll say 269 miles, so about 3 miles lower than when it was new, and I've seen that number change. On some weeks, it'll say 268, and on other weeks, it'll say 270. So it's not an exact science. I don't feel like doing the complete Tesla service mode like battery check where you drain it down from 100% and then charge it all the way back up again. I don't feel like cycling the battery just for that because we're so early in the development process, but rest assured, this will not be the only Model 3 review I do. In fact, I plan on owning this vehicle for many, many years, probably 10, 15, maybe more. Just depends on what our lifestyle justifies. But as far as I can tell, this vehicle fits our needs so perfectly. Plenty of storage space, even for those days when we're picking up a lot of groceries. I love the efficiency. I love the interior. The responsiveness of the display is excellent. The efficiency is good. I'm so glad that Tesla is using their own connector, the North America Charging Standard. And I'm happy to say, unlike a lot of people relying on Electrify America, that never once in my like 10 to 12 supercharging stops over the course of this ownership experience have I ever driven to a supercharger and found a stall that wasn't working. I've never had to wait in line at a supercharger. Every one that I've been routed to has had available stalls. I've always hit the peak charge speeds as well. If it's a V2 station, I get it to 150 kilowatts. If it's V3, this car taps out at 170 kilowatts, but because it's so efficient, that still results in like 600, 700 miles per hour added back to the battery pack. And I've never plugged in and had a communication error. Like every single time I've plugged this car into a supercharger, it just charges charges, and it charges very quickly. But I will mention some downsides while we're on the subject of supercharging. So while yes, in my experience and by what I've seen from other people's experience, it's absolutely more consistent and more reliable than Electrify America. However, the downside with superchargers is they tend to be pretty expensive. I've done several road trips with this car to the Bay Area and to San Diego and back, and supercharging in busy cities like the Bay Area or Los Angeles has always just been more expensive. You'll see some rates at like 45 to 50 cents a kilowatt hour. On my last supercharging trip, one of the superchargers was actually charging 58 cents a kilowatt hour. And once you start getting close to 60 cents a kilowatt hour, that's actually when you're reaching the price of gas at that point. So typically not all of the superchargers you're going to stop at are going to be that high, but there is absolutely a lot of truth to what people are saying when they say that a lot of supercharging trips are not necessarily much cheaper than gas car trips. But the other truth is you're not really supercharging that frequently. It's only for road trips. You're recommended to charge at home most of the time, and that's where I can get 25 cents a kilowatt hour, in which case for gas to beat that, you would have to be at like $1.50 a gallon or like $1 a gallon, and that's like unheard of in the US. It's pretty rare to find gas that cheap. So just for the convenience alone, I'm still grateful to be driving an EV. Let me just say for the record, even if gasoline was under $1 a gallon, I would still prefer driving an EV, because the convenience of not having to make time to drive to the gas station and just being able to plug in whenever you're home, that's so much more convenient, and you always know you'll wake up from home with a full tank or a full charge. Whereas a gas car, it's gonna get low and it's gonna get close to that E even when you're at home, even when it sits there for days on end. I don't miss that at all, and I'm happy to say, even though I still technically own a gas car, I haven't had to drive it to the gas station since the day we picked up this car. I haven't been to one, even to fill up a little gas can for a lawnmower or something. I haven't had to go, which is excellent. But one more downside I will list of superchargers, which is a shame because I think most people, at least in the US, will agree, this is like the best charging network. It's so consistent, very reliable. There's so many more charging stalls at superchargers typically than EA stations, and the connector is so much easier to hold, and you get great peak charge speeds and all that. But I will mention that several times I've been routed to Tesla superchargers that are like inside parking garages on like second floors, or sometimes like in the basement, and that gets pretty annoying because even though at our last trip there was a V3 supercharger that was available and the prices were very low, actually it was like 31 cents a kilowatt hour, so we were like, oh, okay, cool. I had to go into this really busy parking garage, big line of people, and you have to very carefully navigate your way through this big maze, and there were several points where my car was really close to the edges of walls, and I could see all of these scrapes on the side, like lots of cars have bumped up against these tight walls. And I was thinking about the Aptera in this moment. I was like, how is the Aptera, such a wide vehicle, going to fit in such narrow areas, such narrow parking lots, if it is going to have supercharging access? And then they charge you for parking in that parking garage. So it's not that much. Usually it's either free or just a couple of bucks because you're not going to be there very long, but it does add to the overall complexity that not only do you have to pay for the supercharging, but you also have to pay for the parking garage. And it was also raining when we were getting out of it, and to get out of the parking garage you had to swipe your credit card, and there was rain dumping on me. The card reader wasn't working, so I was like, okay, the supercharging part of the experience was very easy. You just plug in and it works, but getting to the supercharger ended up being rather complicated. I hope there's a way in the future via software to just say, don't route me to any supercharger that's inside a parking garage, because that usually adds to the overall amount of time it takes to stop and charge. Even if the charging is quick, if it takes a while to get in and out, then that kind of ruins the superness of it, and you have to pay for parking fees, and the UI doesn't always make that abundantly clear. It does usually say parking fees may apply, but it doesn't tell you what the parking fees are. So still, I will admit supercharging is one of the best reasons to buy a Tesla over any other EV. Very simple, very widespread, incredibly reliable, but it is kind of expensive, and sometimes it's a bit awkward getting to the charger. In terms of other things I don't necessarily like about the car, it's kind of a lot of the things I like about it. Like, the software beats everybody else in the car market, but at the same time, I still wish the software could be a little bit better, particularly when it comes to the self-driving tech. So I've ranted in previous videos about how hard it is to get on full self-driving beta, and don't even get me started on Elon claiming that everybody who pays for FSD can get the beta now. That was not true. You had to be on a very specific software version to get on the beta, and most people were already past that software branch. So the fact that Elon was telling everybody, all you got to do is pay for full self-driving, get the beta, and then all these people signed up and didn't get it, that ticks me off so much, and I hate that he did that, and I hate how much branding there is with, oh, robo-taxis, they're around the corner, and oh yeah, $15,000 $100, that's reasonable because in the future, this car is going to make you money. And I'm like, guys, Tesla is now literally getting sued for their claims following full self-driving, for claiming that they've had all of the hardware needed for it since 2016. Turns out they didn't. Now they're having to offer free retrofits, and the more and more complicated self-driving ends up being, the more and more these promises are going to cost Tesla. And I did have full self-driving for 30 days out of the past 4 months of ownership, and frankly, even though I didn't get on the beta because it's way too complicated, I have a very high safety score, I requested beta several times, I still wasn't very impressed with the non-FSD beta features, like enhanced autopilot, regular autopilot, smart summon, and auto lane change and stuff. Really, I had much higher hopes for this car when buying it, that it was going to make road tripping a lot more of a pleasant experience. And when we drove to San Diego and back, which was around 1,200 miles, we had navigate on autopilot, and it kept rerouting constantly, tons of phantom braking incidents. And while the car, I would say, is smart with its self-driving tech, it's not particularly wise. And what I mean by that is, sure, the car is smart enough to like see something in front of it, know not to hit that, that's important. And yes, it knows how to change lanes and it can see lines on the road, but it employs very little strategy overall. Like, it doesn't see that, yeah, we don't need to get back into the right lane, there's a semi-truck right there, I don't want to be stuck behind the semi-truck. And it's not smart enough to realize, hey, you probably shouldn't get in the left lane right now, there's people screaming 90 miles an hour coming. I can see and take into context vehicles much further away than what the Tesla registers on the display. So yes, it can technically change lanes by itself, but it makes a lot of dumb lane changes, and then people's answer is, well, just set it to confirm. So now if it wants to make a lane change at the wrong time, I have to say cancel, or I have to approve it by pushing down on the gear stock. But that's micromanaging, and that kind of defeats the point of wanting the car to do more of the self-driving on a road trip. I don't want to have to make these micro adjustments when turning the steering wheel or accelerating and decelerating. And I feel like when I had navigate on autopilot, I was still having to cancel or confirm or cancel or confirm or change lanes now, where it wants to change lanes now, but it's not the right time. So that's what I mean by it's not very wise with its decision making. And I'm hoping that with software version 11 of full self-driving, when everything becomes single stack and FSD beta is being used on the freeways as well, hopefully it gets a lot better. But that's part of the reason I wanted to do this review right now, is I just want to preface that the self-driving stuff has not been all that great. I mean, it does the basics well. I love the free version of autopilot because it's very simple. You know, it just stays in between the lines on the highway and it doesn't hit the person in front of you. It usually takes a while for it to speed up, so I find myself pushing on the accelerator like, come on, it's time to go. But I would rather the car be overly hesitant than overly aggressive, so I guess it's a good thing that it's a little bit hesitant. But the free version of autopilot honestly has never had any real phantom braking incidents, but navigate on autopilot very often would slam the brakes when we're going 70 miles an hour, nothing around. It makes everybody uncomfortable in the car, scares people, and it makes people feel in danger. So not very impressed with the current state of FSD. Smart summon is pretty stupid. Auto park is very slow and also not very good. I've tried it several times and it usually botched it or took forever to get it right. And if you were hoping that in 2022 Tesla has improved on their build quality, I'm sad to say I'm not a good example of it. If they have, according to Troy Teslike, there has been an increase in the number of customers per 1,000 that need to get their vehicle serviced for some quality control issue after delivery. He's not seeing that trend go down, and I'm no exception. There's still some build quality issues we had with our car, like there's been a wind noise issue on the driver's side door that I still kind of hear, and I took it into Tesla service 3 times, and I tried to talk to the employees there. I tried to talk to the guys working on the cars. They wouldn't let me talk to anybody, and after 3 visits, they still didn't really fix it. And there's certain circumstances where it goes away. I think it depends on the temperature. Like when it's hot out, I can hear a bit more rattling in the door, but when it's cold, the rattle goes away, but I hear a bit more wind noise. So build quality and fit and finish, if that's really what you care about in a vehicle, unfortunately, Teslas are still probably not going to be for you. It's still coming from the Fremont factory, and Fremont is just screaming right now, building vehicles as fast as possible, and that means that there's not a huge priority on this. It doesn't really bother me all that much. In the first month, you know, I was really going back and forth to the service center, which was not close to our house, very regularly, and trying to be like, how do you fix this? Come on, we paid a lot of money for this car, it needs to be fixed. But I'm not gonna like boycott the company or put up with Electrify America and a better build quality vehicle that uses that charge network. No, I love the supercharging, I love the efficiency, I love the software. So the pros ultimately outweigh the cons, but yes, there are still build quality issues with the car. There's some spots that I'm pretty sure the paint is applied very, very lightly. I'm no paint expert, but I can tell that the paint job on this car is not amazing, but it looks good from an average viewing distance. And while I love the newer features like the heated steering wheel, there's still little things that stack up. You know, the scroll wheels are metal, so that makes them a bit more premium feeling, but it also means in the cold, the rest of the car can be warm and comfortable, but the scroll wheels will be freezing. So when I start adjusting them, I'm like, ooh, part of the wheel is not heated. What the heck? It's turned me into a bit of a schmuck. I've gotten so used to it now and so comfortable with it now that I'm gonna get really snarky with other EVs I may test drive in the future. But there's still things I would like, you know, more CarPlay integration, or at least AirPlay would be appreciated. The accessibility handles not being there, I don't necessarily need them, but I often give rides to my parents or grandparents and they're a lot older and they're used to having a little handle there to access, and that not being there kind of annoys them. But I'm happy to say, like, none of the issues I have with this car necessarily could have been fixed by going with a more expensive Tesla. Like the Model S and X, they're gonna have the same autopilot issues that this car has. They're not gonna have the accessibility handles, and there's still build quality issues with Model S's and X's as well. Longer range is kind of appreciated and I like having it when you can, but it's not something I'm willing to pay an extra $10,000 for. And because we're owning this vehicle for so long, I'm grateful we have the lithium iron phosphate because the cycle life should age much, much better. So that's what's kind of convinced me that we still made the right call. You know, I'm sure some people are asking, Drew, if you could do the whole thing over again, would you change anything? Basically, at this point, I think the only thing I would have done is order the car sooner. As soon as Tesla switched to lithium iron phosphate, that's probably right when I should have bought, because it was about $40,000 back then, and you'd still have the AMD Ryzen processor, the heated windshield wipers, the heated steering wheel. We basically would have the exact same car we have now plus $5,000. But truthfully, we weren't really financially ready back when they originally switched over. You know, I guess we could have gotten a loan, but with YouTube income, it's just not really certain that you're gonna have enough money to pay for the vehicle down the road. But in hindsight, yes, we would have definitely saved more by ordering sooner. But honestly, because it gets a little bit annoying to stop so frequently on a lot of road trips, I no longer really wish I had bought the standard range Model Y, because that had like a 240 mile range and it was 2170 cells. So I appreciate the efficiency and I appreciate that it's a hatchback and the higher ride height and everything, but with degradation and only being able to charge to 80% regularly, the range on that would have been quite a bit worse than this car, in my opinion. And while it would have saved us, you know, $5,000, I think rather preserving like a 260 mile range that lasts for a lot longer is probably the best call when we don't fill up the trunk space very frequently. So the extra cargo of the Model Y would have been kind of wasted on us. But I will still recommend to many people who haven't bought Teslas yet, like the standard range used Model 3s right now are getting very, very cheap. If you don't care all that much about road trip time, these are like low $30,000 Model 3s with enhanced autopilot and supercharging access, which you're not going to get with a Chevy Bolt or an ID4. So just having an EV that's very efficient, that can still go over 200 miles on a charge, and it gets those enhanced autopilot features, which some people may care about more than me. Those are screaming deals. Like, you know, that's $15,000 cheaper than what I paid for my car. And all you're really missing out on those used options is, of course, the lithium iron phosphate, the powered trunk, the high wattage USB-C ports in the front, which, because I often edit on the go and I'm using my laptop in my car, I really care about those high wattage USB-C ports. And now that I have the heated steering wheel, I really love it and I'm comfortable with it. I don't want to go back to a car not having it anymore, but if you never had it in the first place, then you won't feel like you're missing out on all that much. So I guess if I was doing the whole thing over again and I didn't own this car already, I probably would consider buying one of those used Model 3s, because you can get them for $30,000 now. That's an incredible value, and I would have a hard time justifying paying the extra 15 grand for a new Model 3. But now that I already have this new Model 3, and you know, we didn't know what we didn't know back when we ordered, hindsight is always 2020. You'll always know what you should have done after the fact, but knowing what we knew back in March when we ordered this car, I think we made the right call and I'm very happy with it. And things like the heated steering wheel, the high wattage USB-C ports, and I guess the USB-C ports for the backseat passenger as well, and the powered trunk, the heat pump, the AMD Ryzen processor and all that. I appreciate what I have now so much that I'm not willing to downgrade or sell this car for a used Model 3 or anything like that. But I'm not feeling like I'm missing out on much with not having a Model Y or anything. And overall, there's definitely some self-driving disappointment, but I think that's just the natural state of most Tesla owners. They expect full self-driving to be really, really good, and then it gets really stupid, and then we hear on Twitter about how much better it's going to be next year, and then timelines get delayed. So I'll of course do more videos once we get FSD beta on it, but overall, absolutely love the car. The road trip experience is fantastic. I still get excited every time we get to go out and use the car. Love the mobile app and its controls, love the design, and at this point, you know, I keep reminding myself, like, what other EVs are gonna make sense for us in the future? You know, something that is so compact and easy to park, so efficient, can sit up to 5 people, which we've never done, by the way. We've hit 4 people a few times, but never 5. I just can't visualize a situation in which we need a different EV unless the Aptera comes out. That's the only other EV that I'm very interested in because of that extremely high range and extreme efficiency. So even if the Aptera doesn't make it to market for whatever reason, I'm very glad we have this car, and I think we're gonna own it for decades. How are you guys enjoying your Teslas? Are you considering these used options? Are you boycotting Tesla because Elon said something you didn't like on Twitter? Feel free to let me know all your thoughts down in the comments below, and thank you to everyone on Patreon supporting this channel directly. Seriously, helps me out a ton, as does just watching these videos. So thanks again. Have an excellent rest of your day.